Hello everyone and welcome to a new Presearing video. Last year I made a Presearing skills tier list and asked you in the comments to share your opinion about how I place the skills, if you think some of them should be higher or lower, and some of the comments I've seen were really insightful and they made me reconsider how often I actually use the skills as opposed to how often I thought I used them and how good they actually are on paper and in-game versus how good I thought they are in a vacuum. And the results are, well, I changed quite a few placements, so I decided to make an updated 2023 Presearing skills list. And just before we get started, I wanted to say that this is a highly opinionated topic. This is based on my own experiences and my own opinions playing Presearing, and it's also mostly tailored to playing at high level. Some of the skills might be better when you're considering the entire journey to the legendary Defender of Ascalon, but I'm looking at the skills mostly from a level 20 permanent Presearing character perspective, not really the low level effects you get from those skills. So yes, so one more thing before we get started is that since this is a tier list, the highest tier means the best and the lowest tier means the worst, in my opinion. And also within the tiers, the skills will be ordered. So from left, they will be the best, to right, progressively worse. I think they are worse. So for example, if we had 3 skills in the D tier, the one that's closest to the left can be said that it's high D tier, low C tier, and the skills that are more to the right will be progressively worse. Alright, so let's start this with making a whole another tier below. Let's give it a nice gray color and let's name it L, the L tier for Power Shot, because using the skills is a massive L. Power Shot costs energy and it is a DPS upgrade when you are leveling, but when you get to some of the levels like 10 plus, Power Shot deals pretty much as much damage as your normal attack, especially if you have the bonus bow, then, well, especially even earlier. So using this skill makes you pay mana to do less damage because it doesn't increase the damage of your shots. It actually deals a set amount and it scales with your marksmanship, but the higher you pump your marksmanship, also the higher damage you do with auto attacks. So once you get past a certain point in the early game, this skill is not worth using at all. Next, we're gonna go with Imagined Burden. This skill would be decent if Presearing had PvP, but it doesn't. You only use it in that one Mesmer quest and that's about it. Slowing an enemy isn't really required when you can nuke it down or heal the damage it deals. You don't really need to CC anything. And on top of the fact that it costs 15 energy, I don't think there are pretty much any uses at all for this. Similarly, Blinding Flash doesn't cost 15, I think it costs 10 energy, and it blinds for a decent amount. I think at 5 air magic you get 5 seconds of blind, but the uses are minimal. I think you might use it versus Blazefin Griefblade or versus Vanguard Bandits, but you might as well just keep damaging them and you would probably be better off just doing that. So since you, as an elementalist, put most of your points in fire magic, you won't get that much value out of this skill, and that's why I think it belongs in the low D tier. But it has marginally more uses than Imagined Burden. Next, Soul Barbs. Sadly, the dream of a Hex Necromancer is kinda dead, since you're much better off just dealing damage, and there is not really much point in hexing something 10 times. when you can just use pure damage. When you're level 20, the enemies aren't really that much of a threat, so you can DPS them down. And if you're doing Vanguard quests and the enemies are actually a little bit of a threat, you still don't really want to hex them. You have many other better tools to deal with them. But for fun, if you would like to make a hex build, a curse build, this is pretty decent if you want to make that specific off-meta build, so that's why it's higher than the other skills so far. Then, Reversal of Fortune. Enemies in Presearing usually deal damage with a lot of small hits instead of one big one, and Reversal of Fortune doesn't work really good with a lot of small hits. It mostly is there to prevent or lessen the damage from one big hit, so while you might find some use from it, Shielding Hands is a far better skill to use, so that's why I've decided to put it in D. You might use it, but there are better skills that do better job at whatever this skill tries to do. Next, Conjure Phantasm. This skill is pretty much useless after level 5, let's say. The 5 degeneration it sets on an enemy is very good, but very soon the enemies outscale it. They have just too much HP. So this once again could be decent in that off-meta hex/curse build, but as it stands now, it just not enough damage in the time it runs. It might also be used in farming nick items, but as it's single target and still takes a little bit of time to kill the enemy, it's in the D tier. Next up, Retribution. Retribution sounds very good on paper when you try to make a warrior/monk, but the reality is if you put it on yourself, then halving your energy regeneration is just so bad. Warrior has 2 energy regen, and putting a constant -1 energy regeneration on yourself will just kill your DPS because some of the very best warrior skills also require energy, so you'd want to use them instead of this one. Another downside of this skill is that Charchaots will have a field day with you and they will shatter this constantly, so this is probably mostly useful anywhere outside of Northlands, which means Vanguard quests, and even then, you probably want to keep DPSing or use your energy in other more meaningful ways. So, yeah. Sadly, it doesn't work as well as it could. Next up, Faint-Heartedness. I think you know what I'm gonna to say. Another hex skill, you don't really need to do it. The only saving grace of this is that it puts a degeneration on an enemy and a regeneration on you, and slowing an enemy attack speed is also pretty decent. So, in contrast to all the other hex skills, you might actually get some use of this when fighting a high-level Vanguard quest monster, like Blazefiend Griefblade. Slowing the attack speed by 50% will give you some leeway if you have troubles with them. And last skill in D tier is Vampiric Touch. It costs 15 energy, which is what makes it a D tier skill, but it's close to C tier because the amount it heals and deals is actually not that bad. The only other major downside it has is requires melee range, but if an enemy comes right to you, then you might as well. But I would still not really use that skill. I would say it's bad. Next up, we're moving on to C tier, and in C tier we have a bunch of warrior skills, starting with Sever Artery. Now, warriors can use 4 weapon types effectively, and that is swords, hammers, axes, and bows. In Presearing, and swords, I would say, are on the lowest end of the spectrum. Unless you have the Glacial Blade, or you're one of the very few with old school weapons worth hundreds of black dice that have vampirism, there is really no point in using swords in Presearing at level 20, and that's because the skills you get aren't really that good. The only... Well, let's maybe start from this side. Sever Artery inflicts bleeding, and that's it. Bleeding is not really that good in Presearing because monsters die relatively quickly. The only situation when they don't is high-level Vanguard quests. Then it might actually be worth it to use bleeding, but since you will be fighting some undead as part of your Vanguard quests, this skill is not great there. I don't think you can bleed undead. And since some of the other Vanguard quests involve healing enemies, the Growl, you would want to use a hammer there. So, excuse me. So I think this is very, very unlucky for Presearing that bleeding isn't that good of a condition here. And that's why I decided to put Gash here, only slightly higher because it also helps you deal some damage. But since it requires the enemy to be bleeding, you won't get that much value out of sword skills in Presearing. Next up is Hammer Bash, which I decided to put above those sword skills simply because you can knock down an enemy without any restrictions, without any conditions. You just have the required adrenaline, you click this skill, and the enemy is knocked down. Whenever it's a Utini, for example, and it tries to heal itself, this skill will make it so the fight is considerably easier for you because you don't have to deal with that. The major downside is that's the only hammer skill in Presearing, and that sucks because the bonus weapon for warriors in Presearing is the hammer, so that's why a lot of warriors will have the hammer, but playing with just one skill really isn't that great, especially since you don't have any skill that straight up just deals damage, you have a crowd control. So while this skill is amazing, using hammers isn't, because this is the only one, and that's why it's in C, because it doesn't really have any supportive things around it, if that makes sense. Next up, Banish. Banish is pretty weak. It's a tool for monks to deal some damage, and as a monk skill that deals damage, it's subpar to all the other classes. The only thing where it shines is it deals double damage to summoned creatures and undead, since it deals holy damage. And the only place where there are some summoned creatures in Presearing is when you're fighting Necromancer quests for Necromancer for Vanguard quests. And even then, you probably don't want to banish the small guys they summon. You probably want to nuke the Necromancer itself, so... on top of that, Banish has quite a long cooldown for a skill that should be your main damage source, so that's why I decided to put it in C tier. And the last skill we have in C tier is Lightning Javelin, which actually is not really that bad, considering it escapes 25% of armor and it pierces anything along the way, but it has quite a hefty cooldown for a skill that is supposed to deal damage, and that's why you can't really put a lot of points in air magic. And the other reason being that Firestorm is just too good. And also, foes in Presearing don't really have that much armor. Again, not talking about Vanguard quests. Versus Vanguard monsters, this is actually pretty decent, but when compared to the general char runs and Vanguard quests and farming nick items, this isn't really all that great. Although if you put the Lightning Javelin on your bars and you put some points into air magic, you will get some value from it. Next up, we're moving on to B tier, and I think from now on, B tier will represent like the main usage of Presearing skills. I think whatever you find in B tier is fine to use. They're pretty good skills, but it's also our biggest tier, so it's gonna be the highest disparity between the last skill and the first skill. So the lowest skill in B tier, in my opinion, is Vampiric Gaze, and I might get some nasty looks from necromancers now, but I think Vampiric Gaze is a solid skill actually. It deals some damage and it heals you, and that's what you get. It also cannot miss, like Flare, for example, so that's an additional bonus you get. So I think it's pretty solid. Yeah, and there's nothing really much to say about it. Necromancers have a lot of minor heals, and this is one of them. The upside from Vampiric Touch is that it's a ranged skill, so that automatically puts it 2 tiers higher. Next up, we get Healing Signet. Healing Signet is a skill for warriors that is supposed to heal you, and that's what it does. It has low cooldown and it costs no energy, which is a major upside. The downside of this skill is that it makes you have 40 less armor while activating it, and 40 less armor means you get double the damage. So, since you want to heal yourself while you're already damaged, making yourself even more susceptible to damage is pretty risky. So this skill is mostly, I would say, good as quick healing between packs, so you can just keep going and just heal yourself, no energy cost. You get bam, a lot of healing, and you can just go to the next pack. While fighting, I would say it's pretty risky, but the fact that it has 4 seconds cooldown, if you can tank while it's activating, then I think you will be in pretty good condition. Just be wary of using this together with Frenzy, because Frenzy also makes you take double damage, so if you are under the effects of Frenzy and you start healing, then you might be surprised at how quickly your health bar depletes. Next up, Life Siphon. Life Siphon is a very good skill because you can put it on different monsters at the same time. So if you want to life siphon 2 or 3 chars at the same time, you will have the regeneration from all of them, and that will be a pretty good influx of health. The downside of this is that it doesn't do much damage. So if the char have a healing way or a healing char shaman, or if the vanguard enemies have a way to heal themselves, they will heal through the damage from the life siphon. So it should be mostly looked at as a healing skill, in my opinion, with a very slight damage component. And I think it does a pretty good job at that. It can give you a little bit of a safety net, especially when you use the blood renewal skill we will be talking about in a little bit, of additional regeneration, and I think it makes Necromancer a very safe class to play to get the Survivor title, which is maybe why there's one Necromancer with rank 3 Survivor and not many other classes. If you're interested at the moment, I think there are 3 Mesmers, 1 Necromancer, and 1 Ranger. Back to the tier list, next up we have Shielding Hands, and I think that's a skill I didn't really value that high in the last video, but I think it's a pretty good skill for Presearing, and that's because what it does is it reduces the damage from incoming attacks for 8 seconds, and at the end it gives you a little bit of healing. So as I said before, in Presearing, you mostly get damaged with a lot of small hits that add up to your health bar going down. And Shielding Hand protects you from, well, most of the damage you get from those stray hits. It will increase your tankiness by a lot. One downside of this is, just like with Retribution, it's an enchantment, so if you fight Char, just check if they have Char Chaos, because otherwise you will lose this skill, you will get hit with Shatter, and you'll have a bad day. Next up is Aura of Restoration, which is the only skill that restores your HP on a pure Elementalist, and I would say it's a quite decent skill. If you put some points into energy storage. It even gives you 1 point of energy back when you cast spells, which is great for upkeeping, just slinging spells left and right. But even without any points into energy storage, if you're a elementalist secondary, for example, it will still give you that small incremental heal when you cast spells, and I would say that you get more healing out of this than you would initially think. Again, the downside being that it's an enchantment spell, so if you're fighting Charchaots, well, you will get stripped from this. Every fight you'll get more damage than you're healing, so I would say that this skill is better in Vanguard questing than it is in char runs. Next up, Horizon of Healing. Here, it's not way higher because we are playing in Presearing, and at some point players play mostly solo. But even though I said this is a tier list of skills that mostly pertain to Presearing at max level, there are still some moments where you want to play with other players, like speed clears or something, and then the skill is pretty decent. You can also cast it on Necromancer minions, which makes it so they can live a little bit longer. It doesn't cost too much energy, it heals pretty decently, and it has very low cooldown, so you can spam it. And I think I've took a notice that I like to click the button with Horizon of Healing whenever my HP starts dropping, just for a little bit of a safety net, so I think I put it in B tier. Next up, we have the Monk Firestorm. The downsides are apparent. It only deals damage near your initial location, so you cannot shoot it to enemies that are far away. It deals way less damage than Firestorm, and it has half the duration, so I think it's not really a great skill. Where it does shine, however, is warrior monk builds, where you already run into the enemies, you pop this, and you swing your axe probably with Cyclone Axe, and then it really is quite decent. So I think in that one build, it has its niche, and because of that, it's in B tier. And if warrior monks weren't a thing, then it would probably be far lower. Next up, Point Blank Shot. This is one of the skills I ranked quite low in the last tier list, and I've taken a good hard look at how often I actually use this, and I use it quite often. The main downside, and what made me put it so low last time, is you don't really want to run to enemies for the half range. But the reality is that a lot of enemies just come to you, and this is a DPS increase over just regular shooting them. So you might as well, and sometimes you just find yourself in range without having to incur the half range penalty. So in short, if you have to run to an enemy to use this, probably don't, because that should be a DPS loss. But if the enemy already is nearby, then this is pretty good. This also especially is good versus high armored enemies, like, once again, Vanguard quest ones, because the armor will reduce a lot of the damage you deal, and dealing additional damage will give you much better results than using dual shot. And I think that's about it. Next up is Flare. Flare deals very good damage, and it has very low cooldown, and it has very low energy cost. And the fact it's not higher is because it misses a lot. It's so clunky, it's so unfun to use. I found, especially when farming nick items, I would often find myself just shooting once with my weapon to get aggro and then flaring, and it's so uncomfortable. But since it has low energy cost, low cooldown, and high damage, I would say it's a B tier skill for sure, and it's about half of the B tier depth-wise. Very good skill. If elementalists didn't have this, they would definitely feel it, so I would say the B tier spot is well deserved. Next up, Ether Feast. Ether Feast is a very high heal. You definitely notice it when you use it. It heals you for a lot, and you also make the enemy lose 3 energy, which will be useful whenever they are trying to heal themselves, or they are casters that cast spells that you don't really want them to, which is once again most likely heals. So you get very good healing value, and you reduce the enemy energy, so what's not to love here? Next up, Cyclone Axe. Cyclone Axe is our first axe skill, which is, in my opinion, the best melee weapon type for warriors. Axes, let me rephrase that. For char runs, I would say axes are the best weapon type for warriors. For Vanguard quests, it's a different story, but for char runs, axes are the best, because you will be critting a lot, and axes have a big damage spread, and since you're critting, you're using the higher end of the damage, and since the axe skills are, in my opinion, much better than the sword and hammer skills you get, I would say that the axe definitely wins for char runs. So what Cyclone Axe does is, for 5 energy, you deal damage all around you. And since as a warrior with very high armor, you will probably in the very thick of things. Once again, if you have the monk secondary, you can cast the AoE, you can start hitting with Cyclone Axe, and it really kind of works out. So I think it's a pretty good skill. Finally, warriors didn't get any good skills up until now. Well, Hammer Bash was good, but Cyclone Axe is good, it works good, it synergizes good with the playstyle. I think the B tier place is deserved. Next up, Blood Renewal is a, I think, slept on healing skill because it also deals some damage to you, but the reality is you will always heal at the end for more than you paid for it, so think of it as an investment. Plus, it gives you a lot of regeneration during the uptime. It doesn't cost much energy, and it casts really fast, so I would say that this skill is slept on. But would I use it on a necromancer going for rank 3 survivor? I would probably be stressed out using this skill so I don't kill myself during many hours. So use it with caution, but when used with caution, I would say it's a great skill, definitely underrated. Next up, Frenzy, the skill that single-handedly makes warrior the best secondary profession for rangers. It makes you shoot or attack 33% faster, but at a cost of taking double the damage. So once again, survivors, watch out. You can really put yourself in trouble with this skill alone, especially while leveling. I just wouldn't use it. But at endgame, when you're going for higher ranks of survivor, or even trying to go fast in the Northlands, this skill can put you in a lot of bad spots, but it also boosts your damage output by a lot. So I would say it's a great skill, and it's a mark of a skilled warrior player to be able to use this skill effectively and not to their own detriment. Next up, Bane Signet. This is once again one of the skills I had way lower in the last tier list, and this time I believe it should be somewhere around here. I took a long, hard look at how much I actually use it, and even though it doesn't deal that much damage, I don't have any points in smiting prayers, I still use it as a finisher. I still use it to knock down some enemies that are attacking me. It costs no energy, and well, it's just handy to use. There are some downsides. One of the downside is the hefty cooldown, and the other one is that it only knocks down when an enemy is attacking. If this skill knocked down without any condition, or if it knocked down an enemy that is casting spells, it would be S tier easily, because it would allow you to stop enemy spellcasts that really drag out fights, like heals. it would make Utini for martial classes, which is Ranger and Warrior, so much easier. But as it stands, it's still pretty useful versus Char Hunters, versus those pesky bandits that will bleed you. I would say high B tier for sure. And next up is the Necromancer damage dealing Deathly Swarm skill. It deals cold damage, which is not really too often found in Presearing, and it deals quite a lot of it to 3 targets total, and it cannot miss, so you get a lot of... How can I phrase this? When you spend your energy, you get results and you get a lot of damage, and I think it complements Necromancer very well. Also, for builds such as Nucro, which is Necromancer Elementalist or Elementalist Necromancer, it's a staple in the rotation, so I would definitely say the high B tier placement is for sure well deserved. Next up, we have 2 Ranger preparations, Ignite Arrows and Read the Wind. And I would say those 2 skills are very close to each other. Mostly a matter of preference, but not entirely. Let me explain. Read the Wind scales from your marksmanship, it makes arrows go faster, and it deals a little bit additional damage. Ignite Arrows scales off of Wilderness Survival, it makes it so your arrows explode on impact, which is a small AoE, which is great, and it deals a little bit of fire damage. Would I say one is definitely better than the other? Well, math would support that, but it's a game, so use whichever one you want, since the difference is so marginal. But one thing I have to say is that if you use a bonus bow, then the math works out, so Read the Wind is far better than, well, not far, a little bit better than Ignite Arrows. Also, just for consistency, making your arrows fly faster will make it so that when the enemy decides to just randomly move for no reason, the arrow will probably still hit them. It will not be caught mid-flight with the flat bow. So that's why I put Read the Wind slightly higher than Ignite Arrows, and the other reason being that Ignite Arrows scales of Wilderness Survival, and not all Ranger builds utilize that skill, that attribute, so that's why Read the Wind is a little bit higher. And if you want to know my personal preference, on my skill bar, I use Read the Wind. And the last skill we have in B tier is Dual Shot. Dual Shot shoots 2 arrows, makes them deal 25% less damage, and that's about it, so it's a straight up DPS increase. One good thing about Dual Shot is that your preparation gets applied to both arrows. So for example, if you're using Ignite Arrows, which is a point for Ignite Arrows, you will get 2 explosions, boom boom, which is very good. But if you're just using Read the Wind, you will get 2 increased damages. Grammar hard, but I would say this is a very good skill. It kinda drops down when you're fighting enemies that have very high armor, because both of those shots have reduced damage by the skill by 25%, and then additionally it will be reduced by the high armor. So in circumstances like fighting high-level Vanguard enemies that are melee with high armor, point blank shot will give you much higher damage compared to dual shot, and is a much better use of your energy, I would say. Then we're moving to A tier. In A tier, I would say every skill is very, very good, and I would even say extremely good. B tier was our basic skills, and every skill that is found in A tier has great uses. So let's start off with Animate Bone Horror. The Necromancer staple and the last one of our Necromancer spells. I think every Necro player knows why it's so high here. You can make your own small private army. These guys, even though they might be a little annoying and pull a little bit faster than you would like them to, they have the damage and they have the bodies to back it up, and you will end up clearing the altar and nearby very, very, very fast. Not only they deal quite a decent damage, you can make quite a lot of them with high def magic, they also soak up the damage for you, so you can just keep on making more once they kill the char, and just keep the factory going, and you will overrun the altar pretty quickly. One downside is you will not get great use from them while farming bandits, and that's pretty much it, I would say. Next up is Executioner's Strike, which deals a lot of additional damage to your axe strike, just doing what it says on the can, executing the enemy. If they're on low health and they're about to heal, you know what to do, just smack them with this and they will probably drop dead. That's honestly, I would say, all warrior needed, a very hard hitting skill, and that's what they got. So that's also why axes, in my opinion, are the best weapon type for warriors. Next up, the energy glyph for Elementalist's glyph of minor energy is so high here because I think you'll find yourself using this far more than anticipated. Whenever it's on your bars, it makes it so for 5 energy, 2 skills are 10 energy cheaper, and that is with 0 points put into energy storage. Now, I kind of got caught maybe because I'm not sure if it scales off of energy storage, but even if it doesn't, it still gives you tremendous value. It will make your firestorms free. It will make whatever other skill you want to use for 10 energy free, actually 2 of those. So it will really prolong your energy usage if you just keep clicking it. And that's why I think it deserves the A tier for sure. Next up, there are 3 Mesmer skills. I'm gonna put Backfire, Shattered Illusions, and Empathy. And I'm gonna explain myself here. In the last tier list, these skills were in the S tier, and they were there because the Mesmer is by far and the best XP grinding profession in Presearing at level 20. So I was only looking at this from the perspective of a person going for a rank 3 survivor, because those 3 skills just melt bandits. They make it so the bandit runs for Mesmers are substantially shorter than any other profession. You get Backfire for the magic bandits, and you have Empathy for the melee bandits, and you have Shattered Illusions to finish them off. But I might have been overvaluing them simply because I was only looking at those 3 skills in a vacuum of grinding XP. When you're looking at them from the lens of also utilizing them in char runs, then they are not all that great. They're still pretty strong, don't get me wrong, but because they're not that great in char runs, they're just strong and not straight up amazing, I think A tier is where they should stand. And the last 2 skills in the A tier will be our healing skills, Healing Breeze and Troll Unguent. Now, those skills, just like the Ranger preparations, are very, very close. So once again, I would say it's a matter of preference which one you use, but I did put Troll Unguent higher. Now, what's the difference between these two? Healing Breeze costs 5 more energy, but it casts in 1 second. So Troll Unguent costs 5 energy and Breeze costs 10, and Breeze is cast in 1 second, while Troll Unguent is cast in 3 seconds. And that is a tremendous difference. 3-second cast is a lot. They both heal pretty much the same, they give the same regenerations, but the reason why I put Troll Unguent higher is it's not an enchantment, so it will give you so much more just peace of mind while farming char. It will be just, you can click the button you have Troll Unguent bound to, it will heal you, and you don't have to think about char chaos or any Mesmer shattering your enchantments, while when using Healing Breeze, you just have to think a little bit more. So in the end, I would put Troll Unguent a little bit higher, but if you are straight up just doing Vanguard quests, like farming bandits, for example, then I would put Healing Breeze slightly higher than the Unduent. So once again, those two are really close, and I would say mostly a matter of preference. I personally, on my main, use Healing Breeze because I don't put any points in Wilderness Survival. I want to have Healing Breeze and I want to have Horizon of Healing, so I use Healing Prayers and I deal with it at char runs. So if you don't want to have to think about it, use Unduent. If you want to have a fast cast, use Healing Breeze. That's it. And lastly, let's move on to the S tier. And there have been some changes compared to the last tier list as well, but we'll get to that. First up, let's put Resurrection Signet here. And you might be puzzled why Resurrection Signet, essentially, especially since you said we are playing solo, so this skill is kind of dead in the water. Well, I would like to say that there are moments where you're playing with a friend and they die, or you die, and they can resurrect you, and that is the most important thing in Presearing, I would say. This is a game after all, and the games are meant to be played for fun and hanging out with friends, playing, not having to restart a run because some of you died, not having to really feel that mistake. I would say it's worth an S tier for sure, for the power of friendship. Why not? It's also very, very good while leveling. And next up, we have the two pet taming skills, Charm Animal and Comfort Animal. For the sole reason they let you have a pet, and pet is so great. I would definitely say I undervalued those skills last time. They definitely deserve the S tier. The pet is like a second entire health bar for you, and it also deals a little bit of damage, and it's a massive flex if you have the bear. But mostly for the security, you can just send it if you micromanage it properly to tank for you. But even if you don't, if you just keep attacking and the pet will run doing whatever it wants, it will still tank a tremendous amount of damage for you. So you gain a lot of DPS by not having to stop and heal, but you can just keep shooting, keep attacking, keep casting spells, and your pet will probably be fine unless you are in combat 24/7. One more important thing to note when it comes to pets in Presearing is that they don't incur a skill cooldown when they die. In post-searing, when your pet dies, all of your skills are blacked out. They go onto a little cooldown. I don't know, it's like 10 seconds or something. In Presearing, that's not the case. Since we're a tutorial area, the devs probably didn't want people to be sad their pet died, and we don't get punished. So you can just keep resurrecting your pet with Comfort Animal, although you probably should take a little bit better care of your pet. And it won't really die anyway, they're so tanky at level 20. And you already know the last skill on our list is Firestorm. This should probably have a tier of its own, an S+ tier. Firestorm is so great. It single-handedly makes the Elementalist, I would say, one of the best professions in Presearing. It makes it so it's also always a pretty valid choice as a secondary for whatever character you want to make. Even a warrior elementalist can defend their point by just saying the Firestorm is really great. In Presearing, enemies don't scatter, so if you cast a Firestorm at an area with enemies, there's very little point for them to move, and they will probably just die standing in fire. So, yeah, it also deals extremely high damage, and it only costs 10 energy. It's not like 15 you have to spend for Imagined Burden. You get a tremendous amount of value, and definitely the best skill in Presearing in my opinion. Alright, so that concludes the tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed, and once again, if you have any opinions regarding the placement of the skills, if you have any opinions regarding my explanations, if you'd like to make your own tier list, I would suggest drop all of your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to check out the link to the tier maker in the description if you'd like to make your own Presearing skills tier list. I would like to sincerely thank you for watching, If you're down there in the description, you might as well, click that subscribe button, maybe drop a like on the video. And for sure, most important thing, drop a comment saying if you agree or if you don't agree with the Presearing skills tier list, and which is your favorite skill that I definitely placed not high enough and I'm bad. All right. Thank you everyone for watching once again. Hopefully you had a fantastic day. I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.